We're joined by Joan Pont of the California Native Plant Society to tell us about niche gardening, shade-loving native plants. Joan describes herself as an avid gardener, and I can attest that that is the case. She has a lot of other experiences as well that are equally interesting, but today we're going to focus on the garden. And if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A. And without further ado, Joan Pont.
Good morning, and I'm glad it's raining now, so we have one final significant rain. It will make spring planting a lot easier. And I was asked to talk about shade-loving or shade-tolerant native plants because when you first think about plants native to California, you think about the ones that are really tolerant to sun and to our summer dry climate where we don't have rain typically from March to November. But we've got some shady natives and let's talk about them. I view gardening as, because it's my hobby, the best hobby in the world because you can create something beautiful in your own garden. If you gain enough expertise and you're patient enough, you can actually do this on a shoestring budget. By using natives, you're going to increase the biodiversity in your environment, not just of the plants, but of the birds and the invertebrates, the insects, they're good, to make a better whole and more resilient entirety. And you can count yourself as a climate hero because every tree that you plant or every plant that you plant is going to consume carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There seems to be a little bit too much, and putting it in something like wood or the soil where it's going to stay for decades or hundreds of years. This is actually a sun-loving plant, but it was an example of what you can do with a shoestring budget. It is Hooker's evening primrose. Hooker was Darwin's best friend as a botanist. And this plant was in a gravel parking lot with a pile of gravel next to it with a bulldozer that was just about to peel it over. And so I waited until these seed pods were mature and tipped them down and gathered a few seeds for my home garden. So that was, and these are stunning flowers. I mean, they're 4 inches across. So plants can come from many sources. The goals of this talk is to talk, oh, look, I matched the flower, to increase your awareness of when you approach gardening to choose plants where they want to grow and give you some tips on where you can find that information for yourself. And this will lead to reduced garden frustration because you're not going to have failures planting a lovely plant that you really love in your garden where it's too sunny and it just shrivels and dies. That is no fun for anyone. The plant in this picture is shade tolerant. It's the fragrant pitcher sage, and it's in the sage family. A lot of sages have very small flowers that are in groups. These flowers are individual and as big as your thumb. And to me, the leaves smell like minted grapefruit peel. It's a really unique, wonderful plant. So we can start by taking a hike. Probably not right now because this is a webinar, but wait until after the talk. And if you go in a natural area and you hike, you will see very abrupt changes in the vegetation. In the shade, you might see miner's lettuce with its flowers coming straight through the center of the leaf, and 2 feet over, you'll see some sun-loving poppies. So plants can be particular on where they want to grow. We were lucky enough to go down to Monterey in January, and this picture was taken at Point Lobos State Natural Reserve, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful sight. So you can walk around your own home and pretend that it is a very straight-sided hill, and you will have 4 exposures. If you can see your shadow all day, you can see sun all day, that would be the south exposure of that part of a building. If you're drinking your morning coffee and seeing the sunrise, that's going to be your east exposure. Your east exposure is a little gentler than your west exposure because you've got the cool night air. And by the time the sun has shone all day, it's going to be in the shadow in the afternoon. If you're looking at a sunset, with your wine or other adult beverage. That's your west exposure. And if it's in shade all day, that's the north side of your property. That's going to have the most moisture retention, and it's going to be maybe a little more challenging to plant until you learn about all these options. So plants in the wild can't walk. We can pick up a potted plant and walk wherever we want, but plants in the wild can't. So they put a lot of engineering ingenuity into seed dispersal. If you've ever seen the mature seed pod of a maple, it looks like a tight boomerang. It's called a samara. And when the seed is fully mature, it is released from the plant and whirls in circles down to the ground, way far away from the mother plant, so that the offspring maple can grow in sunshine. Coast live oaks and the other oaks that make acorns, those seeds do not fly, but they on their own, but they do fly with scrub jays and stellar jays. So these relatively small birds can swallow 4 or 5 acorns. Imagine the elasticity of their esophagus. It's just amazing. Fly a mile, plant each one individually, eat some of them over the winter, but not all of them, and the others will be oak seedlings. My favorite seed dispersal for a shade plant is the violet. The violet will have the mature seed and put a glop of goo on it called an eliosome, which is like the frosting on a cupcake. It's sweet, it's sticky, it has plenty of fat, so it's high in calories. And it entices ants to collect this seed with the treat to their colony. They'll lick off the food and take the seed and put it in the garbage portion of their colony. And the garbage can eventually get taken out, just like recology does. And the seeds are actually moved by ants. There's actually a number of other plants that have seeds moved by ants. So seed dispersal in nature can be quite remarkable and fun to learn about. Plants also have a second mechanism to make sure they get their offspring in the right place, and they just make millions of seeds. I thought it was impressive that an oak can make 1.5 million acorns in its lifetime, 5,000 a year for 300 years, but these willows have them beat. They can make 30 million seeds a year, and hopefully one of them will take root. So when you see a pussy willow with a cute little white fluffy buds on the stem, when they open up, they're actually lots and lots and lots of individual flowers, and these contain pollen. And once the other flowers get the pollen and gets pollinated, it'll make lots of seeds. And you might think, oh, that's really stupid. They're making 30 million seeds and they only need one. But the other seeds are not going to waste. You'll see goldfinches, really cute birds, eating them all. They're high calorie density, nutritious food for birds and other animals. Some seeds can lie in wait in the ground for decades until the perfect time to germinate. And the others actually become new soil. They decompose to humus, not hummus, like you put on pita, but humus. So with a little gardening know-how and the help of books and webinars and websites, you don't need to plant 30 million seeds like the willow tree. And one basic approach to gardening is realize that there are 4 quadrants. Plants that like sun or need at least 6 hours of direct sun a day, like your tomato plants, to get really flavorful tomatoes, and plants that are adapted to shade. Shade, of course, is a continuum: dappled shade, morning sun, afternoon shade, or dark shade, but basically shade. There are plants that are accommodated to a dry environment. Now, they all need water, but if you overwater them, they may die from a fungal root disease. There's bad fungus and good fungus. So they're accommodated to our summer dry climate with months and months and months of no rain. And there are plants that maybe evolve next to a river and they're used to moisture all the time. So sun dry, sun moist, shade dry, shade moist gives you 4 buckets. And here they are. So I consider the shade dry plants to be the unicorns because to me, they're the most rare. Sunny plants are going to evolve to a dry environment because the water's going to evaporate from the surface. And some plants that are, say, in the high mountains that get more rainfall may be accommodated to more moisture. Shade plants that require a lot of moisture would be logical to have evolved, because if you have a river, with a tree cover right next to the river, in the understory is going to be a moist area where some plants are going to be quite happy. Maybe further away from the river or the steep riverbanks where the moisture is going to be lost quickly are going to be shade tolerant plants which accommodate to a drier environment. And we'll talk about them. I have been looking forward to including this slide for every single webinar, and I'm finally brave enough to do it because I think it's amazing, and we're talking about shade. Every plant needs light to fuel photosynthesis. Light comes from the sun, or grow light if you're indoors. Carbon dioxide comes from the atmosphere into the leaf. Water comes up through the roots. So sun, carbon dioxide, and water make a basic sugar molecule. From that basic sugar molecule, many, many other metabolic steps are taken by the plants to make everything a plant has to offer. If you close your eyes and eat a peach or an apricot, you can tell the difference, and those are flavor molecules. The other molecules that plants create would be cellulose or wood, which can hold up a 400-foot tall redwood tree in a storm, if it's in a forest, or all the 2x4s that are holding up your house. It can create starches, which can be stored for food for long periods of time, like all our grains. Wheat can be stored for a year and ground into bread the following year. So plants require light, but the light they require, they prefer the blue wavelength and the red wavelength, and not even the green wavelength. So a pigment molecule is a unique molecule. It gets, so I'm wearing a purple shirt to make a demonstration. The light is hitting me, and this pigment molecule of this shirt is absorbing all the light waves except purple. Purple gets bounced off. Some of it will go in my eye, ding the cone that registers purple, and go to my brain and say, oh, this is a purple shirt. So when we look outside and see all the green of spring, that is the wasted light, the reflected light that the plant is like, don't need, and it's absorbing the red and the blue on either side. So if that isn't crazy, it was fun when I learned about that. So when you think about evolution.
Okay, wait a minute. Just wait a minute. That's pretty wonderful. I had never thought of it like that. That all of this green we're seeing out in the world is the light that the plants don't want.
Exactly. And in
Oh.
fact, if you're in the bottom of a forest, all those upper trees have absorbed all the good stuff, the blue and the red, and the green may come down. So you can read a newspaper, that's ink on paper, not an illuminated screen. And you can see perfectly well as a human with your eyes, but the plants down there are like, this is totally black. To me, there's no light.
There's no light here.
No light, no good light.
Okay, that was worth the price of admission for me right there. Wonderful.
I learned that when I took the docent course at the California Academy of Sciences, and it stopped me in my tracks. So I'm glad that you
got me.
picked up on the weirdness. Yeah, it's
All right.
so counterintuitive. You think, oh, plants love green. Just
Right.
shine green light on them. They're like, no, thanks.
Okay, proceed.
So when I think about evolution, as a kid, it was power of the fittest, the saber-toothed tigers with the long teeth. But it can be the cleverness of the adaptable. So if you are a plant and you see an area under a tree that is not inhabited by other plants because no other plants can tolerate the shade, and you make some evolutionary changes by accident that you can tolerate that shade, you've got a whole place to live that no one else can live. So the adaptations to shade can be dark leaves. You pack so much chlorophyll in each leaf that any blue or red light that comes down gets captured. So generally we're talking about dark leaves. Thin, large leaves, again, to catch any ray that comes down. They are slower growing. So I hear some, oh no, but that means less pruning for you. Sometimes they just cheat, like an early spring annual will pop out under the trees before the trees leaf out. So they're not, so they're cheating the system. And the last thing in forests, the mother plant, the tree, the mother tree will have offspring and feed their offspring with a root to root connection or a root fungus root connection, giving it the sugar that the plant needs to make for itself eventually by photosynthesis. When the mother tree dies and crashes down, the offspring has a head start and can grow because it finally gets light of its own. So those are some adaptations to living in a shady area. So if you have a corner of your garden, like under this unbelievably beautiful oak tree that's bare, let's fix that. So let me talk about some low ground covers and some bigger shrubs and some really beautiful, stunning plants, which I'm calling accent beauties. And I always like to think about keystone plants or plants that give double duty. So berries that the birds are going to enjoy, host plants for the caterpillars to eat. So I hear a little gasp. Well, actually, I don't. I'm just imagining it. Where people are concerned about having their plants eaten by caterpillars. But caterpillars are necessary for songbirds to feed to their youngsters. High calorie food, high density, soft for their little tiny baby throats, so that that hatchling can grow as quickly as possible to a fledgling to be able to fly and protect itself. So you actually want lots of caterpillars in your garden. I want lots of caterpillars in my garden. And the ones that aren't eaten are turned into butterflies and moths. A songbird can make 500 trips a day to feed her brood. It's impressive. So low ground covers, the lowest ground cover that I could think of in a shady place is Yerba Buena. And the area of San Francisco was called Yerba Buena initially by the Spanish, and before that by the indigenous population. It was not called Yerba Buena, something else. But in 1847, the name came to be San Francisco, but the plant kept its name. It's called Yerba Buena, and it's a mint, a true mint. You can make tea out of it. Here it's draping over a container that I got from Sloat years ago. And actually I have a little tarragon plant because I wanted some herbs outside my kitchen door. And it sort of meanders around, and it's a really, really lovely, low filling in ground cover, Yerba Buena. A little bit bigger and a little bit more unusual is a shade-tolerant salvia, also in the mint family. These leaves don't look particularly dark, but I think that's the photograph because my Salvia spathacea or hummingbird shade has darker leaves. So it's a low-growing plant, maybe a foot tall. It does slowly spread. The flower spikes are 2 feet tall, and they have really bright magenta flowers, and the leaves smell wonderful on a warm day. And it fills in under oak trees really handsomely. And heucheras or coral bells or alum roots, I don't know the derivation of alum root. They don't look very much like aluminum, but they're wonderful, wonderful shade plants. When they don't have flowers, they're a handsome rosette of leaves. And when they do have flowers, they have these airy spikes that pop up. Dan, what's your take on heuchera?
Alum root, it's alum root, alum as in, uh, makes you pucker up, um,
Oh,
staunches cuts, uh,
yeah. Oh,
that
that's
kind
why
of
you have a
alum.
beard, so you don't have to use it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, heucheras are wonderful, and they are not entirely deer resistant. So you have to experiment a little bit. The deer seem to be very choosy. There are hundreds of varieties of heucheras available these days. Um, but I have had the experience of my native heucheras being mowed right down.
Uh,
And so you just have to experiment a little bit with them and get them in the right spot. But they're terrific for the dry shade. Yeah.
and I found that the snails don't eat the heuchera. I mean, I'll have snails devour my vegetable garden, thank you very much. And the heuchera are untouched. So there's something in the structure of the leaf or the taste of the leaf. Maybe it's that pucker power, the alum. So there you go. Anyway, they're great plants. If you have part shade, you have actually a few more options. And I'm really loving the seaside daisy or Erigeron glaucus in the sunflower family. And here it's draping over a low wall and it's at the edge of the oak tree that I previously showed. And it's so covered with flowers in the summer for a long period of time that it almost is flower to flower. I mean, you hardly even see any leaves anymore. And when it's truly established, it can get by with no supplemental irrigation. It is very resourceful plant. You want to irrigate it maybe twice a month until established. And it's still established is a term that gardeners use. You know, like, what does that really mean? I kind of think of it as the plant has doubled in size, is showing that it has a root system that can gather enough nutrients and enough water that it can live on its own, or you can drop down to watering it only monthly. So that's how, and then generally I try to support plants through 2 summer seasons and then see if they can get by on their own. And then I pay attention to another part of my garden for 2 seasons. So it's a remarkable plant and a good pollinator plant, great pollinator plant. So we don't have lawns very often anymore, but we can have grasslands, which is different than a lawn. A turf grass may have little tiny roots and need water all the time, whereas a perennial native grass can have roots going down 20 feet, live 200 years, and require very, very little water. So there are actually commercial products of a no-mow prairie-like look. This one happens to be Festuca idahoensis, Festuca rubra, and Festuca occidentalis. So the convention is if you're naming some plants in a row and you indicated the genus with the first plant, you can just use the first letter for the others. You'll also know that the scientific name or the binomial name is in italics. And what's interesting is that these words, if you are in Japan and you're taking a botany class and you're learning about Festuca idahoensis, it would actually be in these Roman letters. You'd have the hiragana, katakana, Japanese textbook, but it would switch. So it's international. Everybody uses the same letters for the scientific names. Yes.
Hi. A couple of questions here. Going back to the yerba buena,
Mm-hmm.
a good question. If this is mint, is it invasive like mint?
So I have it growing and it's very slow growing. So like a garden mint, you always put in a pot because then your vegetable garden will be 100% mint. It is not like that at all. So it's very well behaved. Good
And
question.
another one, which of these plants are deer resistant? Well, the yerba buena is deer resistant for sure. The
Pretty
salvia,
much, yeah, pretty much all the sages are going to be not tasty to deer, too strong tasting for them.
yeah, there are salvias that you'll find in the nurseries that have they're mostly kind of decorative blue ones that have no scent in the leaves whatsoever, and those they will chow down on. So make sure you scrunch the leaf and smell it, and if it's fairly strong, they'll leave it alone. And certainly the hummingbird sage, the Spathaceae, is very deer resistant. We spoke a little bit about the heucheras being half and half.
So
Uh,
for the fenced yard,
the pitcher sage, I'm quite sure, would be very deer resistant. I mean, you can smell that 10 feet away on a warm day. It's wonderful. Another kind of interesting question is getting into the nuances of what's shade and what's sun, and the question of, okay, so I've got this building that makes shade, but the midday sun comes down and it's really hot for 2 hours and then it's shady again. Is that shade or is that sun or what is it?
That's a challenge because you really don't want it to crisp up during those 2 hours. What I find is if you have a plant that you're planting too close to the shade and all the branches are reaching out to the sun, plant the next plant more in the sun. Similarly, if you have a plant where the shady part is thriving and the other half of the plant is just dead, move the next plant over to the shade. Generally speaking, 2 hours of sun is not going to completely destroy a plant if it's deep shade other times of the day. But observe the plants in your garden and see where they're happiest. You may have to shift the next one a couple feet.
And it depends a little bit on where you're located. If you're in San Francisco, for instance, probably 2 hours of direct summer sun in the middle of the day isn't going to hurt anything. Uh,
Right.
if if on the other hand, you are in Contra Costa County or Sonoma County or San Jose area, those 2 hours are going to be too hot for a lot of the shade lovers. So you have to kind of experiment, as with anything, to figure that out. Joan, would you say that for a sandy location in the outer Richmond and San Francisco, um, that what were we just talking about? The aster would be a good choice?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's its natural environment. In fact, when we go to Cowscape, we'll see where its natural range is. It's really a cute plant, and mine has been in place for 6 years before I took that picture. So I haven't touched it. I don't weed around it because it smothers weeds. It's a fun plant to have.
Thank you.
So we're going to go a little bit bigger to shrubs. And my a friend of mine is a cocktail shrub expert, so I have to specify that these are plants, bushes, small trees, multi-trunked. Generally, the leaves go to the ground, so a shrub would be more gumdrop in profile rather than a tree having a trunk and be more lollipop in profile. And the word to remember about shade-loving shrubs, or one word to remember about shade-loving shrubs is ribes, R-I-B-E-S, ribes. These are native gooseberries that the birds love. So this really pretty pink cascade of flowers appeared spontaneously in my garden. I did not plant it. And I saw it when it was a couple inches tall with these distinctive leaves, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be a Ribes sanguineum glutinosum or pink flowering currant. And 2 years later, it's 6 feet tall and covered with these pink flowers. So I had to tell people not to step on it and certainly not to pull it out like a weed. So that's flowering now, so February and March, and is a really pretty addition to a shady spot. There's other ribes. Ribes is a genus, and there's other species in that group. And the Ribes viburnifolium is a gorgeous plant. It's lower growing and it's evergreen and shiny dark leaves. These very pretty small flowers, the berries that the birds love, and really happy under oaks. And I got a set of Ribes at the slote in Novato 3 years ago, and it's slowly filling in under my oaks and really happy. So I was very, very happy with that addition to my garden. There's a crazy plant called the snowberry. And these berries are large. They're as big as your thumbnail and pretty shiny. This picture doesn't show them being very shiny, but they're pretty shiny. And it is, it's deciduous. It's not evergreen, but is slowly spreading and happy under trees. In fact, only grows under trees and has these startling white berries in November. So it's sort of a Christmas decoration, white berries rather than red berries. And the birds do eat them. They don't find them their favorite food. They save them for last because I guess they're pretty bland tasting. They haven't told me directly, but I'm told that they're bland tasting. So that leaves more decoration for you. But the snowberry is a fun shrub for the shade and gives that sparkling light. So there is consideration for the plants I'm calling big green blobs, like Kermit the Frog. A big green blob is a relatively benign looking mounding dark green plant. So it can be behind something that's really beautiful to show that off more, or it can hide your neighbor's rested RV. So one big green blob that accommodates to shade is coffee berry. It has nothing to do with coffee, but had a passing resemblance. So the common name got developed to be coffee berry. It does have small flowers, and when those flowers get pollinated, it has dark red berries that turn darker and darker through the season that birds love, and actually foxes love coffee berries. So if you're in an open woodland interface area with wild foxes, you are giving them their favorite treat. So what about the big green blobs can show off something in front of it? Dan, did you have something to add?
Well, yeah, coffee berry is really interesting because it also grows right out in the open. If you, for instance, go up on Ring Mountain in Belvedere, you'll find coffee berry growing there, unprotected, but it grows in the V's where the water comes down. So apparently it likes a little more water than some of the chaparral shrubs do. And that might be consistent with it being able to tolerate the shade, because that's kind of a compromise. I'll take some shade if I can get some water, kind of thing.
Right.
So that's interesting. The berries do look quite a bit like mature coffee berries. And I don't think you can make coffee with the seeds. But I happen to have a coffee tree growing in my house that makes coffee berries, and they look very similar to California coffee berry when they ripen up.
It's a really good plant for the garden. So
Let me throw in a question here.
Yeah,
Uh, Kristen wants to throw out the fact that snowberries are toxic to humans, so don't eat them.
thank
Uh,
you.
um, even though this is really a sunny garden question, it's a good one, because we have to deal when we plant native plants that we buy in the nursery, we have to water them for them to survive. They may be drought tolerant in nature, in a sense that they aren't drought tolerant when you grow them in a can and then you transplant that into the garden. You've got to give them water for several years in order for them to get deep enough to tap into whatever moisture they ultimately will need. So this question from Blythe says she has several kinds of ceanothus and other natives in a drip irrigated garden. They're about 2 years established. Should I stop watering them? Excuse me. And my answer would be no, you don't just stop watering them. First, you have to kind of assess whether the drip irrigation has been watering them deeply so that their roots have gone down deeply into the soil.
And wide too.
Often with drip irrigation, we end up just moistening the top layer of soil, and the roots never do go down. They don't have to. So what you need to do is back the watering off so that you're doing it less often and for a longer period of time. Your goal would be at the end of a season to get so that you only have to water, say, once a week this year, and then try to back off to once every 2 weeks next year. And then you might be in a position to stop watering after that if we have normal rains. But
Or still the once a month. which is
Yeah, or you
minimal.
may still need to do it once a month because in nature, these ceanothus would send down a deep taproot. They would spend the first almost month of growing, not even bothering with leaves, but sending this root down. And oak trees do the same thing, so that they get way down there. The native grasses can have roots that are 10 to 20 feet deep. Um, so it's very time consuming. It takes a while to get plants that we transplant uh, to have deep enough roots that we can be confident they'll get through a season. So, keep watering, but do it less often and do it deeper. Um, and if
And what about, Dan, moving the drip to the drip line of the tree? When they're very small, it may be a foot from the tree, and then when they get bigger, it could be 4 feet from the tree, because all the feeder roots are going to be at or beyond the drip line.
Right, the kind of tubing that lets the water out in every 6 inches or a foot that you coil around is really useful for that. As the plant gets bigger, you can move the coil out, and you probably should have 2 layers of coils. What you want to try to avoid is having an emitter here that just sends a little column of water down, and then one over on this side that just sends a little column of water down. And the roots in those particular columns will grow, but the others will be too dry to really grow. So um, I have this mantra that says, with drip irrigations, plants will survive, but they may not thrive. Um, and often you have to supplement the drip irrigation with a good deep soak with the hose once a month, so that the roots have some water down there to go after. And they'll go after it, but they're not going to go after dry ground. Not interested.
Right,
So.
I'll take a 50-foot soaker hose, and that will make a ring, um, 3 times around the drip line of a plant that I'm trying to get established, and leave it on overnight, put a stick in to see how that I've got 18 inches of saturated soil, and do that 3 times a summer, and that's it. Um, so, it's a good deep soak, and it gets, but plants in the wild, you starting from seed, you're right. They'll have 2 little leaves and do roots and roots and roots, infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. The other thing that happens in the wild is that they'll have lateral irrigation. An established oak tree with a deep, deep, deep taproot will actually share water laterally to, like a baccharis, coyote brush, and the baccharis will share laterally to something smaller. The baccharis also can fog irrigate. The leaf structure is such that it can cast moisture and drip moisture, and some other plants can too. So plants in the wild have a better root system. So support your garden plants.
Right. And mulch is helpful in the summer.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
you can
rec
put the temperature probe in the soil, bare soil versus under a mulch, way cooler. So pretty stuff. Oh, why did I wait till now to talk about pretty stuff? Bad me. Okay, here's the Douglas iris. And from my garden, you can tell that it's under an oak tree because here's an oak seedling saying, there's my oak dropping acorns right on top of me. And they are beautiful. They spread slowly. You'll see big patches out at Point Reyes because cows, even though cows are being removed from Point Reyes, cows won't eat them. So they're sort of in a sanctioned site. But they're just gorgeous. And one of my favorite plants. When you think about flowers in a sunny area versus a shady area, there's a different aesthetic. Generally, the spring wildflowers in a sunny hillside are going to be practically confluent, like a watercolor painting, with flowers almost touching each other. When you think of Anza or the 100-year blossoms, super blooms, is a lot of flowers. The flowers tend to have fairly simple structure. This is meadow foam or like a California poppy, 4 petals, fairly simple structure, but the intensity is there with the numbers. If you're in a forest, and this photograph was taken in the Armstrong Forest in Sonoma County, kind of like Muir Woods, it's a redwood forest. The flowers are going to be more widely spaced, but each flower, to me, structurally is just exquisite. And this is a lily, the name, lovely name, fetid adder's tongue, or slink pod. There's a whole bank of them, but each flower is about 6 feet apart from its neighbors. And so it's a more of an Easter egg hunt where you're finding little exquisite pieces of art, more widely spaced in a forest setting. You can add the Jurassic Park look to your garden with ferns. And even though polar bears and penguins don't coexist, ferns and dinosaurs did coexist. Probably the most popular garden native fern is the western sword fern, or Polysticum unitum. The little pinna, the little leaflet, has a wider base, like the hilt of a sword, so your hand doesn't go up to the sharp part of the sword. And that's how it got its common name. But they get pretty sizable and they're really dramatic. So most of the plants that are adapted to shade are dark in color to capture any blue or red light that comes down. But there is an exception. There's probably more than one exception, but I can think of an exception, and it's the fun story of the Ceanothus Diamond Heights. So a lot of people have planted ceanothus in their garden because of the beautiful spring flowers that are blue, dark blue, light blue, and almost to white. But this particular plant was found by a person in 1985 in the Diamond Heights residential district of San Francisco. He took cuttings, he didn't remove the plant, but he took cuttings to a nursery for propagation. And now it's a standard garden plant because it has chartreuse leaves with some dark splotches. Otherwise, a pretty standard ceanothus with beautiful blue flowers. So it can have a pop of color in the dark shade. Just crazy. So maybe you'll be hiking one day and find a new plant. The other way to add color, oh, yes.
I do not generally think of ceanothus as a shade plant. Enlighten me about that.
Well, this one likes light shade, especially in the East Bay. Yeah, it's actually more to the shade. You're absolutely right. All the other ceanothus, which can be low ground covers or very sizable shrubs, and hide your neighbor's, laundry line, they're going to be sun-loving plants.
Okay, but the Diamond Heights tolerates shade well. I
Yeah.
was unaware of that. I'm glad to know it.
So another way to add light or white color in a shady area are the flowers. So we do have native clematis. Do you say clematis or clematis? I don't know. Anyway, vines are a great addition to the small garden because they take very little footprint on the ground, but can cover an entire fence. And these clematis have lovely starry flowers, which are small in size, but just wait. When the flower is pollinated and it's forming its seeds, it has these beautiful little puff balls. So I think the puff balls, or the seed half of the flower, seed forming half of the flower, is actually prettier than the flower itself. And that is why I never deadhead in my garden. Plus, I'm a lazy gardener. Because the flower isn't dead if it jettisons its petals. The petals are basically the neon flashing sign, eat here. Get my pollen, drink my nectar, and by the way, the payment for that food is that you have to fly that pollen to the next flower for cross-pollination. And when the flower is pollinated, it doesn't need that structure anymore, so the petals fall off. The second half of the job is to make seeds. Seeds are very important, to make the next generation of plants, but also as bird food. I mean, you have a bird feeder that kind of congregates birds in one area, which isn't that healthy and may attract rats and all that other stuff. Whereas you can have bird feeders all over your entire garden with the seed pods of flowering plants. Gives you one less job to do in the garden, in my opinion.
Going back one step to the ferns, good question here. Is it okay to plant them under oak trees?
There are ferns under oak trees in nature, so I would say yes. If you go to, take a hike with a naturalist in a natural park and stuff, you'll see beautiful ferns under oak coverings. I don't know, one hike, we did 6 different species of ferns under oaks.
One thing to note is that since at least the live oaks certainly don't want to be watered during the summer. In nature, a lot of the ferns go drought dormant. So they'll kind of disappear during the very driest part of the summer until the rainy season comes again. So you may have to let that happen in your garden to a certain extent to avoid having to water a lot under your live oaks. If you're lucky enough to have valley oaks, that's not really a problem. They like water. But the live oaks can get oak root fungus if you water extensively under them, and so that's never a good idea.
Excellent point. Yeah, keep the irrigation away from that drip line of the live oak, and the plants underneath will either be summer dormant as their accommodation to our summer dry climate, or be able to have some presence over the summer without your irrigation. So beyond plants, I love to hike in the rainy season because you can see mushrooms and lichen and just all the other gorgeous structures that nature throws out in the winter and with moisture. So that's another fun part of gardening. If you find, a fallen branch in your yard, leave it around for a couple of years and you have this art form right there. So plants can grow nearly everywhere. I had to take this picture of this poor little poppy in a little asphalt crack at the corner of a building. But let's give them a break. Let's learn about the right plant for the right place. Don't fight the site. If it's shady, have a shade-loving plant. If it's clay soil, have a clay soil tolerant plant, et cetera, et cetera. So you can find the right plant and start off on the right foot or the right set of roots. There are references. Sloat Garden Centers has a website, which is, of course, incredibly informative. I'm really loving the books, plural, of Peter Wallaben. He's a German forestry manager and writes wonderful stories about nature. We're going to talk more about CalScape. And California Native Plant Society was organized in the 1960s for education and protection of California native plants. Doug Tallamy, who gave a talk for Sloat, has talks and books which are really informative on the whole nature, plants and birds and insects, and how that whole system gives to resiliency. One book I recently found, those of you that really want to go deep, is Native Treasures by Nevin Smith. And it is a gorgeous book and is filled with really sophisticated information on horticulture and gardening. So those that want the next step of education, I would encourage checking out this book. I'm going to go back to CalScape, landscaping in California, adding native plants to your garden, one garden at a time, and show it to you. So we're going to explore native plants. And you can put in general terms or you can filter. And I'm going to do one quick search for vine. that tolerates deep shade. So it started out with 8,000 choices, and now I'm down to 3. And let's go to the clematis that I mentioned earlier, Clematis lingustifolia. You will notice that, oh, here we go. No nursery is going to carry all 8,000 plants. And many of the plants listed aren't even in the trade yet. So the basic, wonderful foundational plants will be there at your slope garden centers. For more rare plants, like the rare bottle of wine or the very, very special fountain pen, you may have to branch out to smaller independent native plant nurseries or California Native Plant Society plant sales that are in every single county. Chapters are in every single county, or the native plant sales of the San Francisco Botanical Garden that has expert horticulturists growing more and more rare plants, or UC Botanical Garden that has native plant nurseries. So the fun thing about this site is that you can find the natural range of this plant where it's growing on its own without a gardener. And you go, wow, that's in my backyard. Maybe it'll be happy in my backyard. So it gives a talk about the plant. It talks about the plant. It says it's a vine and it can grow 30 feet tall if it's climbing up a tree, where it's very, very narrow. It stays flat to the tree. It also gives you landscaping information, deep shade, part shade, the water tolerance, if it's frost sensitive or frost tolerant, and in your sunset zones. So you can go internet sleuthing for a long time and have fun with the Calscape site. And learn more and more through your whole gardening life.
One of
So,
the features of Calscape that I really like is that you can put your zip code in and get a list of all the plants that are native to your zip code, which is kind of exciting for those who want to do some form of sort of restoration gardening, or just want to grow native plants that have a better chance of growing maybe than some others, because they did at one point anyway grow in your particular neighborhood. The other thing to do is just to wander around the neighborhood and see what still is lurking of the old pre-civilization plants. I can tell in my neighborhood that it was at one time a thick oak woodland. But in the early 1900s, the hillside was cleared, and I've seen pictures that it was all vineyards. And this is in Marin. Um, Now there are no vineyards, and they're mostly exotic trees and shrubs that people have brought in to landscape their homes. But there's still a few big old several hundred-year-old oak trees that give you a flavor of, what it once was. So just wandering around and observing a little bit is really helpful. And it also helps you see what's thriving and what's not thriving in the neighborhood to help so that you don't have to be the sole person fighting to make some plant grow that doesn't really want to be there.
right. That's why I think the natural range map on Calscape is so fun, or putting in your zip code. And when I'm replanting oaks, I don't buy oaks. I walk around the neighborhood and find the acorns of my favorite trees and plant them, and buckeyes and bays, trying to reestablish a woodland that was there before it was chopped down. So, any other questions? That was the end of my presentation.
Absolutely. Got a couple here, good ones. Uh, Kate says she loves all the oak shade tree ideas. What about growing things under redwoods? What what should we be thinking about there?
So, the redwoods are not allelopathic. I mean, they're not like eucalyptus. But the duff can be so thick that you probably want to plant at the drip line of the plant rather than closer in, I think. What a remarkable plant that I've seen in redwoods is Festuca californica. It's a grass. It looks like a Japanese painting. It's a bunch grass, and then when the seed pod comes up, it sort of nods, just like a painting. It's really, really pretty. Um, and the other you can buy from seed is called Clintonia siberica. It's a cousin of miner's lettuce. Um, and because it grows in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, Alaska, and Siberia, it's called Siberica. And it's a really cute reseeding perennial that has these pink and white striped flowers and is really happy under redwood trees. So you'd have to get seeds from a specialty nursery, which I did, and they're happy. Let me get the spelling of that plant because I think I said it wrong.
What about taller natives that might be good for hedging in the shade?
Oh, Toyon. Toyon can tolerate, a light shade, not dense shade, and it's hollyberry. It's covered with red berries in the fall, and in the 1930s, it was so popular to cut the branches off for Christmas decorations in Los Angeles that they made it a city ordinance not to cut down the Toyon berries. So it was a protected plant. Um, and that's a great hedging plant. The other is mountain mahogany, Cercocarpus betuloides. Every plant, I mean, I like to find the secret power of every plant just because I think plants are amazing. And mountain mahogany has small flowers. The flowers get pollinated, makes for a seed. And just like a dandelion, when you have a dandelion head and you blow and the seeds float away because it's got this white parachute attached to it. In fact, let me go to mountain mahogany and show you because it's so pretty. The appendage on the seed looks like a silvery feather. Mountain mahogany, Cercocarpus betuloides. Let's go to photos, and here's the feather. Okay, we got that. How do we get rid of it? We did that. Thank you. Let me go back. Now I'm not seeing the, okay. Anyway, and these flutter in the wind. So it's a
There it
really
is.
good hedge plant and tough as nails, slow growing.
I would say that Pacific wax myrtle will also
Of course.
do well in light shade, maybe not in heavy shade, but it gets up 10 to 12 feet easily, very dense, and grows very quickly as well. It's pretty readily available too.
Yeah. And the Pacific wax myrtle, the secret power is the berries have enough wax in them that you can melt them down to make a candle, hence the common name Pacific wax myrtle. And this other secret power is that they're incredibly wind tolerant. Supposedly, if you live next to a freeway and have your 18-wheelers going by at 80 miles an hour, they can take those gusts of wind if you live on a ridge. So Pacific wax myrtle for sure for a screen.
All right. Well, I think we've about got it. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. We had a good crowd today, and thank Joan for all of the wonderful information. And I'm still blown away by the fact that plants don't like green. Poor Kermit. What can I say? So join us again next week for design ideas. and go over to Pleasant Hill and see their in-store presentations. And I'll talk to you sometime in early April about tomatoes here, same time, same station. Can check the Sloat website to see um, the precise dates on those. Oh, and somebody asked, do some sloats have more native plants than others? The answer is yes. In Marin, I would say Kentfield store probably has the most natives. I don't know. In San Francisco, I think it would certainly be the Sloat Boulevard store. And in the East Bay, I imagine it's probably Pleasant Hill. Um, but I don't know for sure. So you might just call somebody over in one of the stores in the East Bay, and they would have more specific knowledge about that. And then you do have local native plant nurseries, which we should all support, um, which would include O'Donnell's in Fairfax and East Bay Natives. And um, I don't know its
So
exact name, but there's one right here in Mill Valley at Tam Junction that's very cute.
I think it's called California Native Nursery. And in Richmond, there's Watershed Nursery. And one of the oldest is California Flora in Fulton, which is just north of Santa Rosa, which seems like a schlep, but they have hundreds of varieties and species and varieties it's a grower nursery established in 1981.
Right, well worth a visit. I was just there about 2 weeks ago, and everything's going strong. Okay, well, thanks again, and we'll tune out now. And looks like it's not going to rain much more today, so let's get outside in the cloudiness and enjoy the day. Bye for now.